our image.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's going to be a fun day. I'm excited to be here. Are you all excited to be here? Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for coming. Our company's about 12 years old, and I'm just one of the partners here, and we are just excited to be able to do this every year. This is our third event. And again, I just want to welcome our speaker and everyone that's joining online. Thank you so much. And I just hope today that you will be blessed abundantly.
All right, thanks, Dave. So typically, you know, a lot of companies out there, they once a year they do a golf outing, or they may do an event to support their colleagues, their partners, their customers. They bring them on board and have a fun event. And so what we wanted to do something different. And so for the last 3 years, Emitted Energy, in lieu of a golf event or doing a park kind of event, what we did was we decided to do a speaker series, leadership speaker series. And the idea behind that would be to, for our customers, for our colleagues and our friends, to really kind of inlay leadership principles and foundations that help us grow each and every day. So again, we're excited on our third annual leadership speaker series.
All right, thank you, Dave and Roy, and thank you all for being here. Just wanted to take a quick moment and to thank our sponsors. So Mark McFarland, he's the owner of Papa John's on 23 in Hayes. So he is providing the food today for lunch. And then also Deborah McLeod is here from Embedded Logic. Stand up, Deb. We're going to embarrass you. Let's give her a hand. She also sponsored this event. So just wanted to take a moment and thank everybody for being here. And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Franzese.
And then there was Pete the Killer, who was Sally Balls' brother.
Took care of that thing for you.
Then you had Nicky Eyes.
What's up, guy?
And Mikey Francesi.
That guy, yeah, I want to see him.
Michael Franzese was not just a soldier, but a capo in the notorious Colombo crime family. He spent the better part of a decade in federal prison on charges including tax fraud, racketeering, and parole violation.
I grew up in New York where there are 5 organized crime families. My dad, Sonny Franzese, was the underboss of the Colombo family back in the 1960s. I went to see my dad in Leavenworth in the visiting room, and I said, "Dad, I'm not going to school anymore." And he said, "Okay, son, but if you're going to be on the street, then I want you on the street the right way." In his mind, the right way was to become a member of his life. He said, "Go home, somebody be in touch with you, do whatever you're told." That's how it started for me.
He was a made member of organized crime. His main forte was making money for the mob. In a very short period of time, he made over $1 billion for the Colombo organized crime family.
Yeah, by far the most lucrative business I got involved in was the wholesale gasoline business. And in a nutshell, we devised a way to collect the taxes, not pay the government the taxes. And I was there to be in business and to make money, real money.
Life magazine called him the mob's young genius.
The government calls him one of the biggest money earners in the history of organized crime.
Handsome and high-living young man, as rich as royalty. And royalty is a prince of the mafia.
Made millions, lived a flashy life, and came to be known as the Yuppie Don.
Did you fix any games in college?
Absolutely.
He says he doesn't have $14 million.
He doesn't. He has about $50 million.
How do you know that?
Because I personally delivered it to him.
I was notorious, infamous, maybe sophisticated at times, but I was a criminal. Eventually, you realize it's a life built on treachery, and that money and power are the driving forces. And I began to question the life and my commitment to the life at that time.
Making the most money for the mob since Al Capone, Michael was the youngest person listed on Fortune magazine's 50 most wealthy and powerful mob bosses. Now, As one of the only guys from that list still alive, Michael has transitioned from powerful mob boss to now speaking in front of thousands of people each week. A lot has changed these past 20 years, but it's safe to say that Michael Franzese is a man on a mission.
Good morning. Thank you. How's everybody this morning? All right. I want you to know I flew in on the red eye from California, but I'm in great shape. No worries about it. I'm feeling good. Anyway, can you hear me okay? Yes. You know, it's funny. At one point in my life, I swore I would never wear a wire. Now I have one on every week, it seems, but it's amazing how things change. But anyway, really good to be back here. This is my third visit to this church. I think I was the first speaker when the church was founded in 2010. Then I came back in 2015. Now I'm here again. And Pastor Scott Blanchard has been a wonderful friend, and thank you. We're going to have a great weekend, doing a couple of services Sunday, one tomorrow night, and we'll have a good time. And, we're talking about leadership this morning, and I think what we're going to do a little session here this morning, take a break, come back, do a little bit more, and then we're going to go have some lunch, I believe, and we're going to open it up for questions. And when we do open it up for questions, people, you can ask me anything that you want. I've been asked everything under the sun. I promise you won't offend me, and if I don't want to answer, I know how to take the fifth. I've done that many times in my life, so we're okay with that. But, when we talk about leadership, I always believe this. Being a boss, being a manager, being a supervisor doesn't automatically make you a leader. A leader is only a leader when people willingly want to follow them. That's how I feel about it. Now, I've had bosses in my life, I've had supervisors in my life, and if I didn't have to listen to them, I wouldn't follow them around the corner because they just didn't have the qualities of leadership. They didn't inspire me. I didn't believe in them. They didn't have the integrity that I thought was necessary to lead somebody. And in my former life, leadership was extremely important. As a matter of fact, if you didn't follow, if you were in a leadership position and you couldn't carry it, normally it didn't work out very well for you. So we're going to get into that. I'm going to tell you what I believe my opinion is of a leader. And it's ironic that I just finished a series. It's called Become a Boss. You could actually put the word leader in there, but it's mostly geared for business, so we put the word boss in there. We just finished this course. You can go on michaelfranzesecourse.com. This is actually the workbook that you would work after the course. It's 13 chapters, and I really put my heart in this, and I think people are going to enjoy it, certainly all over this country, maybe all over the world. With my YouTube exposure now, we have people and clients all over the world. So you can take a look at that. We're not selling it or anything here. Just thought we just literally finished it this past week. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of give you some background on me, a little bit of my life story, and then we're going to integrate some of the things as we go along that really inspired me to be a leader. And I think with a leader, it comes two ways. Number one, there's something innate in you that gives you the qualities of leadership, and then you develop them by observing people that that inspire you, and you try to act the same way or do the same things. And that's how it's been in my life. So, before we get started, people always ask me, and I think you might be curious about this, Michael, how did you transition from being a soldier in one of the 5 New York Cosa Nostra families, and then a capo regime or captain, which is a very powerful position in that life, enjoy some success in that life, and then abruptly end it, just quit, and live to tell about it, because people believe that when you walk away from that life, you don't go into a witness protection program, that you pay for it with your life. And most of the time, that's what happens. As a matter of fact, I'll be honest with you, I don't know anybody that had as high a profile as I did
that reached the level in that life that I did, that walked away without protective custody, without cooperating with the government, and lived to talk about it. And I can tell you this, I certainly don't claim any real credit for being a genius in devising this whole plan because, quite honestly, I didn't know how it was going to work out. I never sold my former associates short. They're very, very capable, and I was just very blessed, very fortunate the way things worked out for me. I mean, I tried to engineer it in a way, but I had no idea if I was going to be successful or not, and that's the truth. So I just probably the most blessed, most fortunate person that's ever going to address you about anything, because if I stayed on the path that I was on, I'd either be dead or in prison for the rest of my life. There's no question about it. And to be standing here in front of you, for me, I'm thankful every single day because I realize every day for me has been a bonus in my life. So let me tell you how I got started with this. I was actually finishing up a 10-year prison sentence in Lompoc Federal Prison out in California. I had pled guilty to a racketeering charge in federal court in Brooklyn, New York. I got a 10-year prison sentence. I had a $15 million restitution. I had $5 million in forfeitures, and I went off to do my time. It was strategic for me at that point in time to take a plea because I had been arrested 18 times. I had been indicted 7 times, 2 federal racketeering cases, one brought on by Rudy Giuliani in 1984. And I had 5 state cases before that. I went to trial 5 times, and I was either acquitted or dismissed in every case. And in the Giuliani case in 1984, I was a lead defendant. It was a racketeering case. So the underlying act was extortion and shylocking, lending out money at usurious rates. I went to trial on that. I was a lead defendant. I had 15 co-defendants. And the day of my arraignment, Rudy had given me a $1 million bail. And I was actually the first major mafia guy that he indicted under the RICO statute. The day of my arraignment, Rudy came up to me in the courtroom and he addressed me and my lawyer and he said, if I convict Franzese on this case, he's going to get double a sentence that his father had. My father got 50 years. He said, you're going to get 100 years on this case. And that's the kind of time they were giving mob guys back in the 80s. You can look it up. I'll never forget, I stood toe-to-toe with Rudy, and I said, hey, Rudy, bring it on. I beat you guys 4 times already. Let's go for round 5. And I'm going to be honest with you, that's the dumbest thing you could ever do. You don't give them more incentive to come after you. But I was kind of young and didn't like the police at that point in time. But fortunately, after a several-month trial in federal court in Manhattan, I was acquitted in that case. Some of my co-defendants were convicted. They got 30 years. So if I lost that case, he would have given me at least 50, no doubt about it. And then they were indicting me on this other big case in Brooklyn Federal Court. I had devised a scheme to defraud the government out of tax on every gallon of gasoline. I ran that operation for about 8 years. I had the Russian mob guys from Brighton Beach involved with me. They were my partners. And at the height of my operation, we were selling 500 million gallons of gas a month. I had 350 gas stations we either owned or operated. We were bringing in $8 to $10 million a week into our operation. And it was a big deal. And so they indicted me on that. And the principal witness against me was my partner. He got in trouble on an unrelated matter, turned informant. The government really wanted me. I was the target. So he was testifying against me in that case. But Rudy Giuliani, realizing that a major witness that was close to me was testifying, got him to testify in his trial, and I was acquitted. We destroyed him on the stand. So what happened at that point? When I realized that they were coming after me on this second one, I told my lawyer, I said, look, we have leverage. It's good to have leverage with the government. I said, this was a big case they brought against me. We beat the principal witness. The government is afraid. They had 5 cases they couldn't convict me on. This is my time to negotiate because I knew they would never leave me alone, no matter what. I was too high profile. They would keep coming until eventually I would fall. And when I did fall, it was going to be a big fall, probably for the rest of my life. So I said, let's negotiate a plea. They initially started out with a $100 million fine, because my case was $2 billion, $100 million fine and 25 years in prison. I rejected that, and we just kept negotiating for 3 months. We finally got them down to $15 million, in restitution, $5 million in forfeitures. I had a jet plane at that time. I had a helicopter. I had 3 houses in different cities in the country. I gave that all up, and a 10-year prison sentence. And I settled for that. I knew I wasn't going to do any better. But it was very strategic on my part, because in taking this plea, that was part of my exit strategy. I was going to move out to California because I met a young girl who I had just married. She's now my wife of 37 years. And my strategy was, okay, I'll do a couple of years in prison. I'll pay the government back some money. I'll move out to California. When I get out on parole, when you have parole and probation, you're not allowed to meet with any of former mob guys or anybody that has a record. So I said I can use that as an excuse not to meet with the guys back in New York, and maybe after 10 or 12 years they'll forget about me. I'll live happily ever after in California. Now, it didn't work out that way, and I'll get into that as we go along. But bottom line, this is how I got to speak. I was finishing up a 10-year prison sentence in Lompoc Federal Prison. I had done 5 years. I made parole. I was out on parole for 13 months, and I had a very difficult time. They did put a contract on my life. My father, who was a major figure in that life, he in some ways betrayed me, went along with the contract. He was very upset with me when I became public that I was walking away. And I had a very rough time for 13 months on parole in California. And after 13 months, like a fool, and I'm the first one to admit it, I made a mistake. I fell into a trap and I violated my parole. The feds put me back in prison. And at that point in time, they were trying to get me to cooperate. When I refused, they really were pretty vengeful towards me. And they kept me in lockdown. They gave me 4 years on the parole violation, and they kept me in solitary confinement for 29 months and 7 days. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, a 6x8 cell. And people, I'll tell you this, that's not easy. I learned through that situation that we were not meant to be solo creatures. We were meant to be social. When those lights went out at night, a lot of guys did not do well. And I can tell you this, fortunately, the time I spent was when I built my faith. I was very much into my Bible. I had my wife send me books on all different faiths, and I came out of there very secure in my faith as a Christian. That's how it started for me. But while I was in the hole, every day I would write the warden. I said, Warden, let me out of here. There's no wise guys out in California. We used to call the California mob guys Mickey Mouse mob. We didn't really, hold them in high regard out there. So I said, I'm not worried about it. I'm not afraid for my life. Let me out they were putting me in there. They said it was to protect me, but basically they were really giving me a hard time. So I would write them every day. Every day I had a yellow pad and a pencil, and I would write them. Took him 29 months and 7 days before he answered me. He sent a correctional officer down to my cell. I never met the warden. They don't come down to the hole. And he said, the warden wants to see you. I said, great. I didn't know why, but let's go. So we get up to his office, and I'll never forget. As I approach his office, he looks at me, and he walks over to his file cabinet. He pulls open the drawer, and there's all my letters, because he was obligated to keep them. That's the rules. And he looks at me and he says, Franzese, you're wearing me out with these letters. I said, hey, Warden, I got a lot of time on my hands. I figure I'll write you, right? What else am I going to do? So he looks at me and he says, look, he said, you want to get out of the hole? I said, yes. I got 6 months to go before I'm released. I said, I got a young, pretty wife. I lost 15 pounds. I look like a wreck. Let me go out, get in the yard, get myself in shape before I go home. He says, well, listen. If you thought you were going to get killed, you wouldn't ask to go out. You're not stupid. I said, thank you for that. He said, you're not going to escape. You got 6 months to go. I said, thank you. So he said, I'm going to let you out of here, but here's the deal. You're going to have to sign a waiver. If anything happens to you on the yard, you get hurt, whatever, you got to sign a waiver that you're not going to hold the Bureau of Prisons responsible. I said, give me, I'll sign anything you want. So I get out on the yard. It's a beautiful day in Northern California. I have a Sony Walkman. When I make this speech in front of young people, I got to explain to them what that is. They don't even know. It shows our age. Everything's digital today. But anyway, I'm walking the track, and I'm listening to Billy Joel. I'll never forget, right? I felt like I was free. And I get halfway into the first lap, and I hear on the loudspeaker, Franzese, report back to the warden's office. Now, that's not good news. I figured I was what you call a central monitoring inmate, meaning any movement on my part had to be approved by Bureau of Prisons in Washington. I figured he got notice from them. They said to lock me down again, so I was ready to go in there and make my speech, right, to try to stay out. When I get there, it gets worse. I see two guys in suits. Now, I don't need to see a badge. I see the suit and the shoes. I knew exactly who they were, FBI. Now, they were putting a lot of pressure on me to cooperate. So I saw them. I turned around. I said, guys, leave me alone. I said, I've been through this too much with you. I'll go back to the hole. I'll come out when I'm ready, when they're ready to release me. They said, no, Francis, get back here. We got to talk to you. I said, I don't want to talk to you. They said, get back here. It's important. Now, I thought maybe something happened with my family, God forbid. I said, okay. We go into the office. I said, what do you guys want? They said, listen, how long have you been down? I said, been down 8 years. You guys know that. You put me here. I said, what do you want? They said, look, we need a favor from you. I said, no favors. I said, anytime you guys got favors, there's strings attached, no favors. They said, just listen. They said, you've been down 8 years. We hear you turned your life around. At least that's what you're telling people. We're going to give you an opportunity to prove it. Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NFL, and NHL are getting together to do an anti-gambling video. Now, I had a big gambling operation on the street. You know, when bookmakers are working on the street, they have to in some way associate themselves with organized crime because they can't operate if they don't. And so I had about 12 or 13 bookmakers that were under my control out there, and they were, a lot of athletes were betting with them, and I can get into all of that in a different time. And so they said, you know better than anybody the problem we have with athletes in gambling and them compromising the outcome of a game. I said, yeah, I know all about it. I said, I was responsible for some of it. They said, well, we want you to contribute to a video that the major leagues are putting together. I said, contribute to a video? I said, you guys have been telling me for 4 years I'm going to get killed. Now you want me to make a video? I said, this got to be a setup, something wrong. They said, no, this is legitimate. We want you to come and help the league. You know the problem with gambling as well or better than anybody else. I said, look, I don't do videos. They said, Michael, if you agree to do this, we're going to sweeten the pot. We're going to make a great deal for you. I said, what's the deal? They said, they're filming this in Chicago. We're going to take you out of here for 3 days. We got a suite for you. King-size bed, go take a dip in a pool, order room service, macaroni, pasta, whatever you Italians eat. They said, for 3 days, who's better than you? And you'll film this video while you're there. I'll never forget, I looked at him, I said, I'll tell you what, I've been down 8 years. You get my wife in that room with me, I'll make a video on anything that you want. And trust me, I meant it. You know, 8 years is a long time, but it's okay, we were married. I got to explain that to the young people when I tell them. But anyway, they said, we'll try. My luck, as it turns out, we had an earthquake in California on the Monday they were going to take me out, and all movement stopped, so they couldn't take me out. But since I agreed to do it, NBA Productions came into the prison, and they filmed my portion of the video in the prison, and I told them straight out, this is how we put athletes in a compromising position. Because remember, it's never about winning or losing, it's always about the point spread. And they did a real good job. All the leagues put in about $250,000. It was all about Pete Rose and Art Schlichter. Greg Gumbel was the MC, and I did my part. They left. I get out 6 months later, and the leagues come to me direct. And they said, Michael, this video is really having an impact. They featured me prominently from beginning to end. And they said, you know the problem. We need you to come and speak to our players directly. This was in 1995. I said, guys, I don't speak to players. I said, I've got to try to figure my life out and how I'm going to survive out here at this point in time. And I'll never forget the head of security for Major League Baseball, Kevin Hallinan, was an ex-homicide detective in New York. And he looked at me and he says, oh, big bad mob guy, you afraid to speak to a couple of athletes? I said, all right, set it up, I'm going, right? So in 1996, I spoke to every professional baseball player in spring training, all 30 teams. We did all their minor league teams. Then it moved on to the NBA, and then I started doing something with the NFL, and I've been doing that ever since, for the last 25 some odd years. 1998, the NCAA jumped on board, and they said, Michael, can you take this message to our college athletes? Since then, I've spoken at about 350 Division I and II universities, all the athletes, women, men, the whole bit. And it's been a very successful program where I think we dissuaded a lot of athletes from getting themselves in trouble. It's a real problem on college campuses, especially with the onset of gaming and the internet. And you'd be surprised how many of these young men and women get themselves in trouble. And I've been doing it ever since. So that's how I started speaking. And then the pastor of my church, when I get out, he said, Michael, you got a great story. Would you give your testimony to our church? When he said testimony, I didn't even know what he was talking about. I thought you did that from a witness stand. I didn't know what he was talking about. But anyway, since then, I've spoken at over 1,600 churches and ministries all over the world in the past 25 some odd years. And I've been very, very blessed to be able to speak in forums like this. And I've done everything from prison ministry to juvenile halls. I speak with a lot of gangbangers. I do all of that stuff. And, I really do believe in life that to those who have been given much, much is expected in return. And so we try to do our part. And I think that's part of leadership, people, giving your all when you're in a position to do it and hopefully helping people along the way. That's what it's really all about. So that's how I got started. Give you a little background because I know everybody's always interested in the mob life and so on and so forth. And I'll tell you this, with the onset of YouTube, there's a lot of guys on YouTube. There's so much misinformation about my former life. So when I get an opportunity, I like to clarify it. And when you do the Q&A, ask me anything that you want. You'll get a straight answer. And when I tell you it's the truth, and if I don't know it, I'll tell you I don't know. But how I got involved in the life. My dad, Sonny Francis, was the underboss of the Colombo family, one of the 5 New York mafia Cosa Nostra families. And by the way, there really is no mafia here in America. Mafia is in Italy. In America, it's called Cosa Nostra. It means this thing of ours. They're similar organizations in many ways and quite dissimilar in others. If you're a made man in Italy and you take the oath, you do take an oath, you're not automatically a made man here in Cosa Nostra and vice versa. When people from the mafia would come here, we were respectful to them, obviously. We were courteous, but we didn't share our secrets because they're 2 separate organizations. And the underboss is a very powerful position. In that life, you have a boss, an underboss, a capo regime or captain, and a soldier. Sure, many of you have seen The Godfather. There is a position called consigliere. Robert Duvall played that role, played it brilliantly, I might add. But in The Godfather, it was fictional because in order to be a sworn made member of that life, and that's what it's called, a made member, your father must be Italian. Mom can be of another descent, but your dad must be Italian. And my dad, in terms of law enforcement investigation, media attention, very high profile, always under investigation, always a major target of law enforcement, kind of like the John Gotti of his day. Sure, many of you heard of John. And I grew up a lot differently than most everybody in this room, I'm sure. I grew up hating the police. I hated the government. I hated law enforcement. And not because my dad taught me that way. He was smart. He taught me to respect the law, but it was really because of what I witnessed as a kid growing up. Law enforcement tactics, techniques against organized crime were very different back then than they are today. Today, everything is very covert. Undercover informants, high-tech surveillance equipment, cameras on the street. Today, you can be under investigation and not really know about it until it's too late. But back in my day, when you were under investigation, they wanted you to know about it. And for a period of about 10 years, when I was a kid growing up, Brooklyn, later on Long Island, New York, my dad was under investigation from 7 or 8 different agencies. FBI, IRS, Queen Detective, Nassau County, you name it, they were on him. Every one of these agencies had a car parked around my house 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They had us cornered on all sides. I was one of 7 kids. Whenever we as a family would leave to go anywhere, we had a parade of law enforcement vehicles following us. Everybody knew when we were coming into town. And one of the reasons why I really hated them people is because I really idolized my father. He was a good father. He was a good husband to my mother. He didn't want this life for me originally. He wanted me to go to school and be a doctor. And I can tell you this. I said a leadership has innate qualities. There's something about him or her that make them a good leader. There's something in them. It has to be. And in other ways, you develop that by observing people that have leadership skills. My father had leadership skills. I really looked up to him. I admired him, and he taught me a lot of things that were really beneficial to me in my life. So as a result, I love my dad. I didn't like the people that were harassing him and coming after him. I didn't care that they wore a badge. Now, I want to make this very clear. Let me tell you an incident. I'll give you a little example of why I hated them, too. We went into a restaurant one night, the whole family. I was one of 7 kids. We sit down. We have a bite to eat. All the law enforcement agents would follow us in and sit in the table behind us and watch us eat, right? One particular night, a Nassau County detective, I'll never forget, he got a little bit out of hand. He walks by the table. He makes a very nasty remark to my dad, loud enough so everybody can hear it. My dad didn't like that. You don't disrespect him, especially in front of his family. Dad jumped up, went right after the detective. Detective got scared. My dad was a pretty tough guy. Pulls out his gun right in the middle of the restaurant. Everybody started screaming. My dad says, "Go ahead, I'll drop you before you get off your first shot." Good stuff when you're eating, right? Me and my brother jump in between him, separate him, pull him apart. You know, normal stuff you do when you were a kid. And so I didn't like them very much back then. But let me make this very clear right now. I do not feel that way anymore. I finally realized in my life they were the good guys and we were the bad guys, at least most of the time. Look, any walk of life, anybody can get out of hand. But, you know, for me, it's amazing how, you know, God can not only transform a heart, and I think people know that he can do that, but how he can transform a mind, how this whole distorted sense of view I had growing up, where good was bad, bad was good, God's been able to fix that. Today, some of my dearest friends are in law enforcement all over this country, and in some cases all over the world. I've met with law enforcement all over the world, and not because I share information. I don't do that. I didn't put anybody in prison. We're just friends. And I've done a lot of work with law enforcement, helping young people. And people, I got to say this, I have to bring it out. When you have a platform and you can make your views known, as long as you're not offending anybody, I think it's the right thing to do. I believe this defund the police movement is the most insane, asinine thing I've ever heard of. And I'm a former criminal. And I tell people, do you think if Rudy Giuliani would have came to me and said, "Mike, don't worry about it. We're going to soften the racketeering laws. If you get locked up, we're not going to give you bail. Don't worry about it. We're going to let you out." You think I would have said, "Oh, great, Rudy, now I'm going to become straight"? No, I would have said, "Hey, now it's easier to be a criminal." And that's how these guys think. And I think we're seeing that all over the country. It's insanity. I don't understand it. I just can't process it in my mind. I don't know how people think this way. My people have said, "Michael, come on. You know, you didn't like the police." I said, "Excuse me. Yeah, that was then, but I have 5 daughters. I have a wife. I have 6 grandkids. When they walk down the street, I want them to be protected. Who's going to do it? You? Me? I'm going to call the police." I mean, I think it's insane, people, and hopefully, you know, what's going on in this country, people, the leaders in this country really start to lead the right way, and I'm talking both sides of the aisle, and get this thing straight, because their number one purpose in this country is to protect its citizens. That's number one, from both domestically and abroad, and I hope they get it together and do that. And I love my dad. Originally, I'm going to school. I'm going to be a doctor. That's what he wanted from me. He gets some very serious trouble in the 60s. He was indicted 3 times in the state of New York, very serious crimes, twice for grand larceny, once for murder. He goes to trial on all 3 of those cases. He gets acquitted, found not guilty. But then in 1966, they indict my father in federal court for masterminding a nationwide string of bank robberies. And after a lengthy trial, he was convicted. In 1967, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison. In 1970, he loses all his appeals. They ship him off to Leavenworth Penitentiary in Kansas to do his time. And you know, people, leadership comes from experiences also. And there was a point of time in my life where I had to take control when my dad went away. I was 18 years old. When my dad went away for 50 years, which was essentially a death sentence, he went in when he was 50 years old. I had my mom and I had younger brothers and sisters. And my dad looked at me and he says, "Michael, I'm relying on you. You're the oldest. You got to take control and make sure your mom and your sisters and your brother are okay." Now, because he said that, and he could have said, I had an older brother. He said that to him too. My older brother wasn't qualified or equipped to do that. When my dad went away, he left. He went out to San Francisco and just couldn't deal with anything. I don't fault him for it. I love my brother. He's a good person, works hard. He just wasn't qualified. He couldn't do it. He couldn't handle it emotionally, mentally, or any other way. And so I took over in that regard. And again, it wasn't something I anticipated. It wasn't something I expected. I wasn't prepared for it. I didn't sit down and say, okay, this is what I have to do. Sometimes you're thrown into a situation and you find out who you are and what you are at that point in time. And I want to make this clear too. My dad obviously did a lot of bad things in his life, no doubt. So did I when I was in that life. But that particular crime that my dad did 40 years in prison on, he was innocent of. My dad was no bank robber. I'll take that to my grave. I took control of that case. We investigated thoroughly. We spoke to every witness that testified against him. They all recanted their testimony. We gave them lie detector tests, proved they lied, and named my father as the mastermind. We could never get the conviction overturned. We went up to the Supreme Court on constitutional issues of my dad's case. We could never get the conviction overturned. My dad did 40 years in prison for a crime that he didn't commit. My dad was released from prison in 2017 at the age of 100. He was in and out on parole a few times. Every time he came out, he violated his parole by associating with other felons. I couldn't keep him away from people. So he ends up doing 40 years. He gets released at 100 in 2017. He was the oldest federal inmate in the system in the country at that point in time. And my dad passed away, unfortunately, 2 years ago at the age of 103. He was the oldest living mob guy, made guy in America, quite possibly in the world. I don't think anybody lived to that age. But very, very sad. But when my dad went away, Joe Colombo, who was the boss of our family, he kind of took me under his wing. Start to meet a lot of my dad's friends. Mike, what are you doing going to school? If you don't help your father out, he's going to die in prison. Defining moment in my life. You know, I think leaders have defining moments that really separates them from whether they can be a leader or whether they're not a leader. And again, there's no knock on this. You know, if you're not a leader, you're just not a leader. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that's not your thing. You're not qualified to do it. People come to me all the time with ideas, and I know their personality, I know their background. I said, you know what? You're better off working. Go to work. There's nothing wrong with that. You're good at what you do. I don't think your strong points are leading people. I don't think that's what you're qualified to do. And that's not a knock on you, because I can't do what you're doing. You'll do that better than me. So sometimes you just stay in your lane and you don't try to be what you're not and what you're not qualified to be. And it was at that point in time when I said, okay, if I don't help my dad out, he's going to die in jail. And that's what we thought, because normally you don't live to be 100. So I went to see my father in prison. I said, Dad, I'm not going to school anymore. I was a pre-med student at Hofstra University. I said, I'm not going to school anymore. If I don't help you out, you're going to die in here. Now, he was very upset. He didn't want that for me. He said, no, son, I want you to go to school. You're going to be the first professional in the family. I said, Dad, my mind is made up. I'm done. I'm not going to do it. I can't let you stay in here. Again, this is something that just evolved. And the reason I'm saying this, think about your own life, things that you have. You know, we all have defining moments in our life that kind of tell us who we are and where we're going and what we're going to be. And this was kind of a defining moment that I didn't realize at the time, but it was something where I knew, you know what, I had to take charge of this situation or my dad would probably die in prison. And the reason I did that, now if he would have said to me, I'm guilty, there's nothing you can do, it might have been a different situation. But he looked at me when I asked him, I'll never forget, I said, Dad, bank robbery? And he looked me in the eyes and he said, son, I am not guilty. I'm innocent. I was framed on this case. He said, we got to do something to get me out of this. And that was it. I trusted him. I believed in him. And that was what motivated me to do what I did. So we're sitting in the visiting room, Leavenworth Penitentiary, and I told him that. We argued about it a little bit, back and forth. I was a headstrong kid. He knew my mind was made up. And he looked at me and he said, son, if you're going to be on the street, I need you on the street the right way. In his mind, the right way was to become a member of his life. He said to me, go home, somebody's going to be in touch with you, do whatever you're told. That was it. He didn't sit down, he didn't break it down for me, he didn't say, hey, this is what you need to do, this is what your qualifications are. You know, that life is a secret life. And you're not supposed to talk about it with anybody outside of that life. And if my dad was anything, he was a good soldier. He wouldn't violate that policy, even with me, his own son. He just knew I had it in me, go home and do what you're told. And you know what? I didn't question my dad at that point. You know, one of the things that I really admired about my dad, he never brought what was going on in the outside world into the house. In the house, we were family. He didn't discuss it. He didn't get into it. I was amazed at times. He'd have a string of law enforcement people outside, and he would walk through them with me like they weren't even there, that they didn't exist. He did not want it to be a part of the family. Everything I knew about my dad was from observation, was from the media, was from other people telling me all about him, never from his lips. And when he said, go home and do what you're told, I didn't question him. I said, okay, Dad, if this is what you want, we'll figure it out along the way. Again, starting to understand, okay, I'm going to have to take control. I don't know what I'm getting involved in, but I'm going to deal with it. So 2 weeks later, a captain in the family picks me up, takes me to see the boss. Joe Colombo had been shot, seriously wounded. He eventually died from the wounds. We had a big Italian-American civil rights rally at Columbus Circle. I was about 12 steps away from Joey when he got hit. It was a horrible day in my life. I'll be honest, it was the first real insight I got into that life. And a new boss took over. His name was Tom DeBella. Tom has passed on now. I sat with Tom. He said, Mike, I got a message from your father. He said, you want to become a member of this life. Is that true? And I'll never forget. I said, hey, if that's what my dad wants, that's what I want. And he looked at me very sternly and he said, I didn't ask you what your dad wanted. I asked you what you wanted. And he said, is this what you want? And he kind of put me on the spot and I said, yes. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't even really know what I was getting into. I mean, I observed everything. I'm 18 years old, but I was an athlete in school. I did want to be a doctor. I was removed from that life other than what I observed from my father. A lot of guys on the street that went into that life, that's what they aspired to be their entire life. They looked up to the mob guys. They wanted to be part of that. That wasn't me. I only got into the life really to help my dad. That's not what I wanted. But I said, okay, this is a situation I'm put in. I got to help my dad. I got to take control. I said, yes. He said, well, here's the deal. From now on, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're on call to serve this family, the Colombo family. That means if your mother is sick and dying and you're at her bedside and we call you to service, you leave your mother, you come and serve us. From now on, we're number one in your life before anything and everything. When and if we feel you deserve this privilege, this honor to become a member, we'll let you know. People, the mob's not a business. It's a way of life. It's a whole subculture from everything else that exists. We got our own policies, our own rules and regulations. We affect everybody around us, family, friends, people we do business with. We do business as part of that life, but it's a way of life. And I was 21 years old at that point, and I was in kind of like a pledge period where I had to do anything and everything I was told to do to prove myself worthy. And it could have been something very menial. There's a lot of discipline in that life. And people, I've learned something. If you want to be a leader, you got to learn how to take the authority. You got to accept authority. You got to learn how to be disciplined. You got to learn how to be subservient at times. Even if somebody you don't believe in or trust in, if he's your boss and you're obligated to listen, you got to listen. Sometimes you got to accept authority, okay, in a situation that you don't respect. And that person's not a leader. He's your boss. He's your supervisor, your manager, but he's not your leader. But you still got to obey. And in that life, it's all about authority, it's all about discipline, it's all about respect. And you got to learn how to be all three of those. You got to learn how to deal with it, or you can't lead. You can't expect others to respect you if you don't know how to respect the authority that might have been put on you at one point in time. And so for the next 2.5 years, I was in kind of a pledge period. It's known as a recruit, where I had to do anything and everything to prove myself worthy. And people, I'm going to tell you this, it's not normal life. That life at times is very violent. That you're part of the life, you're part of the violence. And I've seen things in my life that I wish I had never seen, and got involved in things that I wish I had never got involved in. And I'm being perfectly honest with you. And all of these things, I think, are part of what I am today is largely a product of what I did for 20 years in that life. And a lot of good things that I learned that I took with me afterwards that were very helpful, and a lot of things I just want to forget. But it's all these experiences that you go through in life that build your character one way or the other, and that really prepare you for whatever life has got in front of you, the things that are coming up. And after about 2.5 years, I proved myself worthy. It was Halloween night, 1975, anniversary coming up soon. That I was walked into a room with 5 other gentlemen. That night, we all took an oath and became sworn, made members of the Colombo family. Now, I took that oath very seriously back then. I take it very seriously this morning, even though I don't consider myself a member of the life anymore. You come into the life, you don't sign a contract. There's no retirement age. Can't say, hey, I'm done. You know what they say? They say when you leave that life, you either leave in a coffin or you join the government and enter a witness protection program. Obviously, I've done neither. It was a very solemn ceremony, dimly lit room late at night. They wanted you to understand the seriousness of what you were getting involved in. And we walked into the room individually, the 6 of us did. Boss was seated at the head of like a horseshoe configuration, underboss, consigliere to his left and right. All the captains, capo regimes were alongside of them. We had about 15, excuse me, in our family at that point. Walked down the aisle, stood in front of the boss, held out my finger. He took a knife, cut my finger, some blood dropped on the floor. This is a blood oath. I cupped my hands. He took a picture of a saint, Catholic altar card, put it in my hands, lit it aflame. Didn't hurt, it burnt quickly, it was merely symbolic. And he said something to me that night I don't recall hearing in my life before. He said, tonight, Michael Francis, you are born again into a new life, into Cosa Nostra. Violate what you know about this life, betray your brothers, and you will die and burn in hell like the saint is burning in your hands. Do you accept? And I said, yes, I do. The other 5 guys went in. They all took the oath. This is how it started for me. When you come into the life, you come in as a soldier. I was motivated to do 2 things. Number 1, I wanted to get my dad out of prison. I did get him out after 10 years on parole. He kept violating and going back. And secondly, I wanted to make money. My dad said, in this life, you make money. It translates to power, not unlike the real world. And you saw the DVD. We'll get into that a little bit maybe after we take a break. I was very fortunate. I knew how to use that life to benefit me in business, and I went on to make a very significant amount of money. And in that life, if you separate yourself in that regard and you're bringing money into the family, you rise in the ranks quite often. And as a result of that, in 1980, the boss of my family, Carmine Persico, who was indicted and convicted on the Mafia Commission case by Rudy Giuliani. He got a 100-year sentence. He recently died in prison, I think in 2019. But he came to me, he says, Michael, you're doing a good job for the family. We're going to make you a capo regime or captain. And that's a very powerful position. It really is. And from 1980 until 95, when I consider myself formally removed from that life, I operated in that capacity. And you know, in that life, you have 2 levels of people, I would say. You have the racketeer and you have the gangster. And the racketeer is more or less the guy that understands the life, understands how to use the life to benefit me, to benefit him rather in business, and goes on to make money for the family. And the gangsters are those that are not qualified to do that, but they have other qualifications and they do some of the heavy work, I would say. A gangster normally can't be a racketeer because they don't have the ability to earn. They don't understand how the life can benefit them if they operate and use it the right way because they're gangsters. They're street guys. The racketeer, okay, has to be a gangster also. But they usually separate those guys because like any organization in the world, without money, it doesn't work. So they respect the guys that are bringing the money into the family. They want to protect them to a degree. But you still have to be able and qualified because you're always going to be called upon to do something in that life that requires you to be somewhat gangster. And I separated myself in that regard because I was motivated for 2 things. Number 1, I wanted to rise in the ranks because I wanted to be the best possible mob guy I could be to please my father, and just that's how I do things. And secondly, we needed money in order to help my father get out of prison. You know, there's a big fallacy out there, misinformation. When a guy goes away in prison, the mob takes care of them, takes care of their family, they're all set up, don't worry about it. Not true. Not at all. My father had money on the street. He had a few little businesses going. After 3 years, that money went out and he didn't have any more money. And it was really up to me or somebody at that point to support the family. And like I said, I had a mother and 3 younger brothers and sisters. And I took that upon myself. Again, I'm not using this to build myself up, people. I'm trying to make examples. And hopefully, as you're thinking, you know, you think about your own life and these defining moments in your life when you either had to step it up and be the leader and get things done, or maybe that's not who you were. I don't know. You know, and you relaxed yourself into another position that could have been helpful, but it wasn't a leadership position. And so I said at this point in time, I have to do what I have to do to protect my family, to have my mother and children and my brothers and sisters survive, and hopefully get my dad out of prison. And that's what I did. And I brought some new things into the family they hadn't done before. I did get involved in this whole gasoline tax fraud case, but I also had legitimate businesses. I had two automobile dealerships. I had a Chevrolet dealership. I had a Mazda agency. I had a couple of restaurants that I owned. I had a production company out in LA. I was very, very aggressive back then. I worked 24/7. That's what really mattered to me at that point, was to earn, provide for my family, and get my dad out of prison. And we spent tremendous amount of money on legal fees and appeals and everything else. So it was a constant thing that we were doing. Again, I became a major target of law enforcement during that time, so I had a lot of stuff going on, people. Not only do you have to navigate what's going on the street, because that can be a very treacherous life at times. If you want to get into that in the Q&A, that's not really the subject here now. We can do that. Like I said, you can ask me anything that you want. This is your morning. I'm here to, to satisfy and to try to educate or inform you, I should say. But whatever you want to ask me, you can at that point. And so I'm working very, very hard at that to do what I needed to do, and under some very tough conditions, because again, treacherous life to navigate. In my case, it was even harder because I had the name because of my father's profile. I had made a name for myself, and I was a constant target of law enforcement. I found out, I didn't know this until after, I think, my fifth indictment, but the government had put together a 14-agency task force, and they would meet in the courthouse in Uniondale, Long Island, twice a month, and their main objective was to put me in prison for life. And I didn't find this out until I took the plea, and all of this came out in the discovery information. But that's the kind of scrutiny that I had on me. So it was very, very difficult. People, I will tell you this too. I say this all the time. I never glorify my former life, and the reason I do that, because I call it an evil lifestyle. Now, why do I say that? I'm not calling the men evil. I was one of them. I just happened to be very fortunate, very blessed, and there was a lot of guys that I think inwardly were good guys, just misdirected, did the wrong thing, but they were good guys. There were some good people in that life, and there was others that you probably want to stay away from. But I call it an evil lifestyle because I don't know any family of any member of that life, including my own, and not my wife and kids, but my mother, my brothers and sisters, my father. I don't know any member of the family that hasn't been totally devastated. Totally. And any lifestyle that does that to a family is no good. It's bad. It's evil. That's what I tell these young kids in the gangs. I said, you're hurting your family. You're selfish. I said, because they're going to suffer. They're going to have to visit you in prison. They're going to suffer over all of this while you're doing your silly things that you're doing, and you're, suffering the consequences. They're suffering along with you. And when my mom passed away in 2012, I can only describe her relationship with my father as ugly, because she blamed him for everything that went wrong in her life. 33 years without a husband. And what went wrong in her life? Well, my sister, age of 27, died of an overdose of drugs. And this was all a direct result of my dad's being in prison, no doubt about it. My younger brother, 25 years as a drug addict. I can't even begin to tell you what we as a family and me personally went through. So many times I saved this kid from getting killed. Okay, if it wasn't for me and my dad, he wouldn't have lasted. 25 years a drug addict. He got into some real trouble. He cooperated with the government, became an informant, and actually, when my dad got out of prison at the age of 92, after his fifth violation, my dad was indicted again at the age of 93, and my brother was the principal witness against him in the case. It was the first time that a son testified against the father. My dad was convicted, and they gave him another 8 years at the age of 93. That's why he came out at the age of 100. So total destruction. My younger sister, 41 years old, she was never emotionally stable. She died young of cancer. The family was a mess. And my older brother just kind of took off, and it's a mess. And every family of every member of that life that I know of went through similar destruction. So any lifestyle that does that to a family is no good. As a matter of fact, I'll share this with you. One of the differences I had with my dad afterwards, I sat with him, and I said, Dad, this wasn't too long before he passed away. I said, Dad, our family was destroyed as a result of our membership, yours in particular, in this life. And he wouldn't take responsibility for it. He blamed my mother. He blamed everybody. And he said, no, this is not my fault. I was framed. I went to jail for a crime I didn't commit. I said, Dad, I know that. But you weren't framed because you were a doctor, a lawyer, or a priest. You're framed because you're a criminal. You're a mob guy like me. The government doesn't always play fair. We know that. What do we expect? I said, but the opportunities that you had when you were out on parole, and I told you, get away from New York, leave, put the family first. You didn't want to do it. I said, so you have to claim responsibility for that. And he wouldn't. He just couldn't do it. And I understood it was just too hard for him, I think. And, we patched things up. I mean, I love my dad no matter what. And we patched everything up. But it was kind of, it was a real tough issue that I had with him. Anyway, things started to change for me in 1984. Again, another defining moment. Among many things I was doing, I was making movies, and I'll cut to the chase. I was filming a movie. Smokey Robinson was a friend. He brought me a script. We were filming a movie in Florida, and I brought cast and crew from L.A. to work in the film, and 20 professional dancers. It was a dance movie. And to make a very long story short, I spotted a 20-year-old dancer on that film that I fell very much in love with. She was a young Christian girl, and she's now my wife of 37 years. And as a result of my meeting her and not wanting to put her through what other families have gone through, that's when I had to make the decision whether I was going to walk away from that life or not. And again, like I started out earlier, I took the plea as a result of my meeting her and trying to cut my losses and somehow have a life with her. And it worked out. I mean, I did the time in prison, but we're still married 37 years later. We got children and grandchildren. And I've been very blessed to be in that situation. So I always say this, ladies, behind every good man, there is a woman there supporting him and telling him what to do. And my wife was a tremendous inspiration for me. In her way, in our family, she is the leader in a lot of ways because she inspires me to do the right thing. Another important aspect of leadership, I tell young people all the time, in this life, we are who we hang out with. The people that we surround ourselves with are really going to be who we're judged by, the company that we keep. And of course, we're going to be influenced by them, no doubt about it. When I came to faith, I tell people, I didn't get a lobotomy. I don't forget the 20 some odd years I put on the street. And there's times when I'm drawn back to do certain things that I know I shouldn't be doing. Okay, but fortunately, I have a wife that keeps me straight. I have my kids. I have people that trust and believe in me. I have my faith. I don't want to, disappoint God in the things that I'm doing in the ministry that He gave me. So I try to keep it straight. So I surround myself with the right people. Secondly, accountability. Who you are accountable to in life is going to direct the path that you lead in life. No doubt about it. When I was on the street, I was accountable to my boss. I was accountable to my oath. As a result, I was involved in criminal activity, and I justified it. Because when you take that oath, you justify the criminal activity that you're involved in, even the bad things, the very sinful things, you justify it. Hey, we all took the oath, we all know what we were doing, and if somebody has to pay the price because they violated the oath, that's too bad for them. That's how you justify it. It's wrong. But you justify it because I was accountable to my oath. Now, I'm accountable to God. I'm accountable to my wife, to my kids, to the people that trust in me, to the pastor that brings me in to speak to the congregation. Accountability. And I found out because if you're not the same person when you walk off the stage as you are on the stage, people are not going to rely on you and they're going to find you out at some point in time. You got to be consistent. You got to be accountable to the right people in life. And that's a major part of leadership, people. People think that when you're a leader, you don't have to obey, you don't have to listen, No, it's not that way. Leaders have to pay attention to authority also. I tell people under me all the time, I counsel them, just because you don't like the way the government is doing, that doesn't mean you don't pay attention and you don't accept their authority. If I told you not to, I'd be leading you down the wrong path. There's things that I don't like, but I have to pay attention. There's laws that I think are ridiculous, but I have to pay attention to them. I have to know how to respect the law, whether I like it or not, and I have to know how to respect authority, even though I don't think maybe some person is qualified. If they're in that position and I'm subservient to them in some way, I gotta deal with it. So I think, maybe we'll take a little break now, 15, 20 minutes or something. We'll just relax a little bit, then we'll come back and get into this a little bit more. Good? Okay, thank you.
Let's give it back up for Michael Franzese.
Thank you, Scott. I think we'll probably be a little less than 55 minutes. I know people are anxious to ask questions. I do this quite a bit, and I'll tell you a quick story. I was in Singapore, and I was speaking to about 1,800 people. It was a pretty full auditorium. And when we were done, my host came up to me and he said, Michael, we promised a Q&A to everyone as part of the package. I said, that's fine. He said, but Singaporeans don't ask questions. He said, they're very polite. They're very reserved. They don't ask questions. He said, but we promised it, so we're going to put a shill in the audience, and we're going to ask you a question or two, and that's it. I said, hey, we'll go home early. It's okay, right? We start the Q&A. I was there for 2.5 hours. I was stunned. They knew everything there was to know about the mob life. They were asking me questions about John Gotti, about where was Jimmy Hoffa buried, just on and on and on. And I found that to be the case all over the world. It's amazing. I learned that the #1 movie ever in China was The Godfather. #1 movie. And I've seen this all. I just did a tour in the United Kingdom over the summer. I was there for 2 months. And I was just amazed at the amount of recognition that I had. I mean, just walking down the street, my wife started to walk away from me. She said, I can't take this anymore, because people were coming out of pubs and grabbing me, come in, let's go, into the pub and have a drink. And, the reason for that is I have a YouTube channel that we've been very blessed. In 2 years, we're just approaching 1 million subs, and we got about 500 million views. And I can tell you this, if you're in business and you want to expand, I have a lot of knowledge now about YouTube because we've been into it for 2 years, but it's the biggest platform in the world. There's no question about it. If you can succeed on YouTube, you're going to get world-renowned recognition, no doubt. And it's been very powerful for me over the past couple of years. But it's amazing. I never realized when I was part of the life how intriguing this life is to people outside of the life. When you're in the life, this is your life. This is what you do. But seeing it, when I first started speaking at churches, I'd go into the Midwest, and people didn't know me there. They knew me in New York. I had a lot of publicity, maybe in California, but Midwest, no. And on the marquee, they would put the mobster, and it was standing room only, just because they want to see a mob guy. So, for me, I look at it, in faith-based terms, is that God has given me a platform to get people in the door, and then, I do what I'm obligated to do at that point in time. So, but it's been very, very fortunate for me. But, getting into, I think, in kind of telling you where my life, how my life kind of got to from where I started to where I am now, I think that during this time is when I found out about myself, whether I was capable to be a leader or not. And obviously for me, it worked out that way. I was put into a position where I either had to respond or I couldn't respond. And again, if you can't, that doesn't say anything wrong about you. It just says that's not what you're qualified to do. And like I said, I try to tell people all the time, if this is not your thing, it's not your thing. Don't worry about it. People come to me all the time and they want to start a business, and I talk to them for a little bit, and you could just tell that it's just not their thing, and they're better off working. They're not, they probably can't handle people the right way. And people have said to me, because I had an amount of success on the street, they said, Michael, you're a brilliant businessman. All the money that you've made and all the different enterprises you're in. And I'm the first one to tell you, I said, I am not a brilliant businessman. There are a lot of things in business that I don't understand the process. I don't want to understand it. It's not something I'm going to do. I'm not going to do it right. So no, I'm not a brilliant businessman. There's a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me, but I did have a talent. And in my case, the talent was I knew how to recognize a good deal when it came my way. And when you're in the mob life and you kind of separate yourself as the guy that, can be supportive of people and help people and have some success, you're constantly being barraged with business opportunities. And 90% of them, they don't make any sense. But I knew how to recognize a good business. And at that point in time, I knew myself I wasn't going to get in and do all the detail work. That's not my thing. But I knew at that point in time I had a slogan for myself, and that is, do what you do best, designate the rest. And my talent was in realizing what I couldn't do, what my weak points were, and then finding people to do that much better than me, and then motivating them to get the best out of them. And that's where the leadership part comes in, to motivate the people around you so that they believe in you and you get the best out of them. And if you put the right people in the right place and you know how to motivate them and take care of them the right way, well, then you can have some success. And that's been my secret. It's not been me doing the work. You know, I ran 2 dealerships that if you asked me how, you know, to go into my parts department and make that a success, I wouldn't know how to do it. But I hired a great guy to be my parts manager. I hired a great guy to be my service manager. I had a great guy to be my salesperson. You know, and we put good people together, and as a result, they made you successful. So it's very important as a leader to be able to recognize talent in people or recognize people that don't have the talent that you need them for. And that's been my secret to success. You know, in this YouTube channel, I'll tell you how this started. When the pandemic came, I had 43 speaking dates that were postponed or canceled. My team, I have a team around me, said, Michael, why don't you do YouTube? I said, I don't want to do YouTube. I'm not into social media. I don't like it. They said, no, you got to do something. They said, what are you doing? I said, truthfully, I'm staying home. I haven't been this home in 25 years. It's nice, you know. I usually on the road 35, 40 weeks out of the year. And they said, let's start YouTube. So we started, reluctantly I started it, and by some, you know, good fortune, it just blew up. And the reason it's blowing up is because we pick out the content. We got great editors. They do the right job. They know how to position it. They know, you know, when to schedule it. There's a lot of different things you got to know about YouTube in order to get the algorithms working your way and so on and so forth. Well, I don't do that. I don't have the patience for that, but I got a great team around me that does it and helps me make it grow. And that's the same with everything that I'm doing. You know, for the past 20 years, people have been coming to me to make a movie about my life. I don't know if you know the entertainment industry, but there is more wasted time, wasted money, wasted energy, and BS, I don't want to say the wrong word, in that industry than there is anywhere else in anything I've ever experienced. And I just never felt right about it. It wasn't the right time. And then 2.5 years ago, a fellow by the name of Ron Shelton, who was a big writer-director in the industry, and a company called Kennedy Marshall. And Frank Marshall is, I think he's the 3rd highest grossing producer and filmmaker in the industry. He did all the Jurassic Park movies, all the Indiana Jones, you name it, he's done it. And he approached me and he said, Michael, we want to do a movie on your life. And I sat down with them for 2 hours in the office. And Frank looked at me and he said, Michael, this is not a movie, it's a television series. There's too much content here. And I said, okay. And I felt really good about the 2 of them. One of the reasons was because Ron Shelton, and he did a lot with Kevin Costner movies, he did a lot of stuff. He was so knowledgeable about my life. He had really done his homework by the time I got in the room. And I said, okay, guys, I said, I think I'm going to go with this, but here's the deal. Frank, how old are you? He said, well, I'm 73. I said, well, I'm 68 at the time. I said, I don't want to see a television series when I'm 85. I said, or 90, because that's how this industry goes. I said, if you give me your word that you're going to make this, then I'm not going to spend 100 hours with the writer telling them everything there is to know about my life and working out this script and the Bible and everything that has to be done. If you tell me that, I said, and you shake my hand and you guarantee me, then we'll make a deal. He said, well, I can't guarantee anything, you know. I said, well, then we don't have a deal. And then he looked at me and he says, well, I guarantee you that this will be a television series. I just can't guarantee you who it's going to be with, Amazon, Netflix, or whatever. I said, well, that's fine, as long as you're telling me this will be done before I'm like 72. And I'm 71 now, so he's got, yeah. As a matter of fact, today at 5:30, we have a pitch call with Amazon. Amazon has seen the script and the Bible. There's so much that goes into this. And they really liked it. They had a script revision that they wanted. The revision was made. Now we're back on the phone with them to do the pitch today. So maybe they'll take it. We'll see what happens. But if not, we have 5 or 6 other places we're going. So it's a process. And there again, you know, one of the qualities of leadership that I found with people is, number one, you have to have integrity. There's no question about it. I mean, people, like I said, you know, when I was on the street, my first captain that I had, I listened to him. I was subservient to him. When I mean subservient, I don't mean that in a demeaning way. I did what I was told. I accepted his authority, but I wouldn't follow him into battle. No way. And if there were things that he needed me to do, I didn't feel he was qualified to do them. So if you're not qualified to do them and it's something serious, how could you tell me to do it? You know, you have to inspire in people that if you're asking them to do something, they know that you can do it also. And I think that's very important. You know, in the military, I was speaking to somebody, and I think you'll agree with that. You know, if you're in a leadership position, especially in battle, you know, if you're leading people, they want to know that, hey, this guy's in the trenches with me, and he can do the same thing that I can do, and he'll do it maybe better than me. That's what inspires you to follow somebody. And it's like I said early on, you know, you can be a boss or a supervisor or a manager. You can be in that position. It doesn't mean you're a leader. It just means you're in a person of authority. And in that particular case, we have to listen to that authority, but you're not a leader. And I've seen that many, many times, especially in the street. Guys got elevated into position for different reasons. It's like in the government, you know, you're close with somebody. There's a lot of nepotism in that life. You know, you become a boss or you become a captain and you have men under you. Doesn't necessarily mean you're qualified to be in that position. And, you know, I'm very keen on that. You know, whenever I'm in business with somebody or I'm doing something with someone, I want to make sure they're in a position that I have faith in them. And that if we're going to be into a deal together, that they're going to be able to carry their end and be a leader in that particular area that they're in. So, you know, I'm really sorry. I really put my heart in this course, and it's not ready at this moment to send to you. But it's called michaelfranciscourse.com. At your leisure, at some point in time, if you're really interested in leadership, and I'm going to tell you right up front, this is biblically based. Now, what I mean by that is I'm not preaching to people, but there are certain things that I've learned in the Bible that have really inspired me and have helped me in my role throughout my life or from the time I became a Christian. And there were certain stories in there. The story of David, to me, fascinates me. How this young man took such a leadership position, the control that he had, and where he went in his life. It's an astounding story, and it's real. It's based. And I use a lot of David's experiences to explain certain things in leadership that inspired me throughout my life. I think it could be very, very helpful. You know, I want to tell you this. You know, I think there's always somebody in life that you emulate, you want to look up to, that have certain qualities that you try to absorb and put into practice in your own life. My father was very, very helpful to me in many, many ways. He taught me, he said, Michael, I'm going to teach you a couple of things. He said, when you go to prison, it's inevitable, it's going to happen one day. So I'm going to give you 3 words that are going to be very helpful. He said, please, thank you, and excuse me. I said, well, what do you mean? He says, Mike, everybody in prison that never got any respect on the street wants all the respect in here. He said, and they want to prove it to everybody that they're worthy of respect. So how do they do it? They're not always that intelligent. They're guys on the street. And if you bunk into them, well, they want to show you that they're somebody and you shouldn't bunk into them. So they'll retaliate in some way. So Michael, you know, if you bunk into somebody, excuse me, you know, I'm sorry about that. Goes a long way. He said, if you want to cut somebody online because you got a friend that's there and he wants to talk to you, please, do you mind if I get in front of you? Is it okay? You know, give them the respect, the courtesy, okay? And somebody hands you something, you say thank you. And you know what? I never had a problem in 8 years in prison that I spent. All right, 3 years I was in a hole. That was me and myself. But other than that, I never had a problem. And I know guys that, you know, look, John Gotti got beat up in prison, got beat up bad. You can't throw your weight around in there. When you're there with guys that are doing life and triple life, they don't care who you are. You know, what do they got to lose? You know, if probably half of them say, hey, if I'm not here tomorrow, what did I lose? I don't have to stay in this place anymore. You know, you got to learn how, you know, to be respectful to people. He also taught me, he said, Michael, he said, be respectful to the little people in life. When he said little people, he didn't mean it in a demeaning way. It was just his way of saying things. He said, they're the people that make you strong. The valet parker, When he comes to bring you a car, treat him right. Give him a nice tip. Make him feel good, that you appreciate the fact that he brought you his car. The waiter, treat the waiter good if they're doing the right thing with you. The person, all those, he says, treat them right. You know what? He was right. There was times that, way back when in the Copacabana and places in clubs in Manhattan, I would go in there, I would treat people right, and I have a ringside table. Not because only I was me, because I treated them the right way. Because there was other guys that came in that thought they were entitled to it because of who they were. Well, you know what? People don't like that. They may do it, they may begrudgingly do it because they have to or they don't want to offend somebody, but they don't like that. It's better to make people like you if you can by being respectful to them. And respect is a big thing. My father also taught me this, and this was so important in that life, and I think this is qualities of a leader. He said, Michael, learn how to be a good listener. He said, don't speak before you know what you're going to say. It was a great negotiation. In that life, we have what you call sit-downs. Everything was a sit-down. Some of them were very, very serious. Some of them, hey, where are we going to eat tonight? Sit down, let's talk about it. We called it sit-downs. My YouTube channel is called A Sit-Down with Michael Franzese. And there's some very, very serious situations. You could be discussing life or death in the matter of somebody that might have made a mistake and is facing some serious consequences. But he always said, Mike, let the other person talk. Listen to everything they have to say before you say anything. He said, don't commit yourself. And it's helped me so much in negotiating because there's times when I walked into the room, I was the smartest guy in the room, no doubt. I knew back and forth, inside and out, exactly what was going to happen in there. But I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want anybody to know it. I wanted them to talk. I wanted to hear everything they had to say. And most of the time, all they did was make my position stronger. Because now they told me things that maybe I didn't know that helped me even better in that negotiation. There was other times when I wasn't the smartest person in the room. I had no idea. I said, I don't know how this is going to work out. And I kept quiet and let people talk. Well, by the time they finished talking, now I knew what I needed to know. And I was able to go and talk in that meeting. And my dad taught me that. And, I was a good listener, with my father. I listened to what he had to say because he was a student of that life. He knew it intimately well. And you have to know the ins and outs in that life in order to really survive and prosper and make your way there. Another thing he taught me, and I really believe these are all leadership qualities because in dealing with people, it always gave me an advantage and an edge because I understood things. I understood the psychology of people. He told me, Michael, be the last person ever to pass judgment on somebody. He said, don't jump to conclusions. Don't be the first person to point your finger at somebody because when that time comes around and it's your turn, and it will be in that life, it's inevitable. He said, people are going to remember exactly how you behaved. You were the first one to judge somebody, the first one to condemn somebody. When that wheel turns around and it's your turn, they're going to do the same thing for you. And I was in that situation, people. I walked, one of the horrors of that life is that you make a mistake, your best friend walks you into a room, and you don't walk out again. And unfortunately, throughout my 25 years in that life, I've seen that happen probably too many times. Because sometimes, things are supposed to be upright and respectful, but it's like anything else. Money and power corrupts people, whether you're in government or you're on the street or anywhere in between. Even in corporate America, we know that. And I was put into that situation one time where I was walked into a room, and it was over money, and, boss of my family was getting a little concerned because, we were becoming a pretty powerful faction of the family, and they wanted to make sure that I knew who was the boss, and that's how things go in that life. And it was probably the scariest time of my life. I walked out of a car. I had to go into a basement apartment, and the 30-yard walk from the car to that basement apartment was the scariest moments of my life. Because the way it was set up, I'll never forget, it was a day in August, and it was in Brooklyn. And when I tell the story, I can smell the aroma of the flowers and I can hear the crickets chirping because my senses were so high. And I'll tell you this, people, if you don't believe in God, don't matter. When you think you're going to meet your God, you start praying. Because trust me, I was praying, and I was not a Christian at that point. But because when I walked into that room, when that door opened, I didn't know if that was going to be the last thing I was ever going to see in my life, because I knew the setup. And I don't know how, I didn't collapse when the door opened, but I didn't. People said to me, Michael, why didn't you cut and run? You had the opportunity. I said, well, it wasn't heroic. It was robotic. I had just said to myself, hey, I was so much a product of that life. If this is it, this is it. And I walked into that room. And, but I also believe that certainly in faith-based situations that, God never throws you into the fire without preparing you. And I believe that that moment prepared me for what I was going to face later on in my life when I walked away. And I didn't know it then, but taught me that I could face death if I had to. And it was helpful in making the choice to walk away from that life. So, I'm saying all these things. This is part of who I am, and I'm not saying this to build myself at all, because believe me, people, I know my weak points too. And, I think that one of the most attractive qualities in people in power and people in leadership positions is humility. Humility is such an attractive quality. It's one of the things, I will say this, and again, this is not a Christian thing. I will say this, I think it's important. When I came to Christ, I did it differently than most people. Because from my entire life, from the time I was 5 years old, my father had drummed it into my head, Michael, you got to be a man's man. That's the standard in life you have to live up to. When you walk down the street, you got to hold your head up high, you got to have integrity. You got to treat people right, treat women and children the right way, be respectful. He always taught me those principles and characteristics. And when I got into the life, all I ever heard, we're men of honor, we're men among men, we're men's men. I heard that. If I didn't hear it once, I heard it 1,000 times. So when I came to Christ, I did something different. Realizing that he was a man, Jesus of Nazareth, I separated his manhood from his deity, and I wanted to see what type of guy he was. And so I studied the Bible, the Gospels, just in that way. What kind of man was he? And quite honestly, I was so fascinated and blown away by the personality, the character of Jesus as a man. I said, if I'm going to emulate anyone in this life, this is who I have to emulate, because as it is written in Scripture, he was the only perfect man that ever walked the face of the earth in every single way. It was flawless. And you can't say that about anyone else. We all have faults and weak parts in our life. And so I reasoned like this, this is leadership reasoning, okay? If I emulate the greatest man that ever walked the face of the earth, well, if I'm a husband, I'm going to be a better husband to my wife. If I'm a father, I'm going to be a better father to my children. If I'm a boss, I'm going to treat my employees right and respectfully. If I'm an employee, I'm going to give my boss an honest day's work. I said, so everybody in the community is going to benefit from me emulating the greatest man that ever walked the face of the earth, and I'm going to benefit in the same way throughout my lifetime. And then I said, well, if he's not the Savior of the world, when I'm dead anyway. So what did I have to lose? Nothing. But throughout my life, emulating somebody with his character and his attributes can only make me a better person. I try to reason and logic in everything that I do. What's the logic behind this? What's the reasoning behind this? It's even when I did come to Christ. I didn't come easy. I challenged him. I said, wait a second. I trusted my father. I walked blindly into this life, and look where it got me. It got me in solitary confinement. The Fed said they're going to keep me in here for the rest of my life. They're going to try to put another case against me. I said, I took a blood oath. I said twice I gave up my life, and twice I made a bad mistake. I can't do this again. And I said, I want to see the evidence that supports this. I said, not only my wife telling me and my mother-in-law telling me and all this stuff, I want to see the evidence. I break everything down. I always tell people, you're not selling me the Brooklyn Bridge when I'm paying attention, because I want to see the logic, the evidence behind it that supports your position. And I think as a leader, you need to do that. You can't just be sold a bill of goods. Somebody asked me this morning, you mind if I repeat it? There was a question on an application that he was taking, something like that, and they said, do you make snap decisions? Are you decisive? You make them quick, or do you take time to think? Well, I think there's situations where you have to do both. But most of the time, I want to think about something. If it's important and there's going to be an outcome or a bearing or result as a result of my decision, I want to think about it a minute. I don't make snap decisions. Now, obviously, there's times when you can't. You got to act quick. And so it goes both ways. And I think a leader has to, be able to discern that and see which way he's going to go. So, I wrote down a couple of things. You got to understand, so I'm unconventional. I'm not a teacher up here teaching you how to be a leader. I do that in my course, okay? But that's not me up there doing it. It's an online course. It's very easy to follow, and I break it down in very, very simple terms. But I wrote a couple of things down that I want to share with you so I didn't forget, that I think are qualities of leader that are very important. Obviously, you got to have integrity. Listen, it's obvious you're not going to follow somebody that you believe is not doing the right thing. And that's kind of an oxymoron for me, because on the street, you're a criminal, but allegedly you have integrity. So I try to, when I think back of my life now, I try to say, well, did that really add up? If I'm committing crimes and I'm disobeying the law and I'm breaking the law, does that mean that I had integrity, even though I was trying to act with integrity within the confines of my life? I don't know. So maybe in that way I violated it, because you're not having integrity when you're a lawbreaker. And I was a lawbreaker. It's funny. During that time, I took full responsibility. I violated the laws of God and the laws of man every day of my life for 20 some odd years that I was in that life. And yet, allegedly, as a leader, you have integrity. Well, I don't know about that. So I'm venting or sharing that with you. I think this is really important. If you're a leader, you got to have confidence, obviously. But don't ever mistake confidence with arrogance. I don't like arrogance in people. Confidence, you got to have confidence as a leader. You got to trust your ability to do things. You got to be a risk taker, but a calculated risk. When people say, I want to take a risk, and I say, well, wait a second. It's crazy. The thing that you're telling me that you want to do, you just can't do. So it's not a risk. That's just a stupid thing that you're trying to do. Now, take a calculated risk. When you look at, what possibly could happen, what are the chances of you succeeding? And if you don't succeed, how bad are the repercussions going to be? So now when you figure all of this out, okay, I can take this risk because the downside is not that terrible. I'm not going to destroy my life. I'm not going to ruin myself. I'm not going to go out of business. But if I win, there's a big upside for me. So a leader has to be able to discern that and have to know when they can take a risk that makes sense. Value relationships. I think one of the most important things in my life has been my networking ability. And I tell people this all the time. I meet people, I may have nothing to do with them for 5 years. And then all of a sudden something will click. Hey, I remember I met that guy. I use the old-fashioned word Rolodex. And I remember I met this person, and this situation came up, and maybe I'll give them a call because they said, hey, if you ever need anything, Mike, give me a call. Maybe we can do something together. And you just file it away. Networking has been so important. I'm doing this. Somebody invited me to a big celebrity golf tournament next Friday night. And I love golf. But I didn't want to go to this tournament because I had a choice. I was doing a fundraiser for a candidate that I'm supporting for Congress, a conservative guy that I like. And we were doing a dinner for him on Friday, and then we were going to have a get out to vote thing on Saturday. Fortunately, they canceled the dinner, so I'm going to the golf thing. The only reason I'm really going is because of the people that are going to be there. And I know that, some of them, we could cross paths at one point in time, might be beneficial to us. So networking is very, very important. Just my success can be pointed so often to the people that I've met and that I've been able to do something with and been able to mutually benefit from our relationship. So I really encourage you to do that. Sometimes you want to go to a thing, you may not be interested. I have friends that tell me, Michael, I went to this big seminar, and everything that they were talking about I knew, but I met some great people. And, a guy told me the other day, I hired a guy that I really needed. I met him at the seminar, and he's writing copy for me now. And if I didn't go to the seminar, I would have never met him. So sometimes it's good just to, to be around people that can benefit you at some point in time. Again, these are leadership qualities, because if you want to succeed, you got to know how to do things. You got to know what steps to take to make you get to a successful point in your life. Important to help others achieve their goals. If you're a leader, you can't be concerned that somebody might be better than you or might surpass you. As a matter of fact, you got to look at that as a badge of honor. Hey, if I tutored him and he turned out to be better than me, hey, that's a feather in my cap. You can't be challenged by that. You can't be worried about that or concerned about it so that you hold back. You can't feel, a leader is never worried about somebody taking his position. Because if they take his position there, he's going to succeed, or she's going to succeed somewhere else. Doesn't matter. So you got to give your people the best. My people that work under me, I want them to be the best possible. I want them to be better than me, every one of them, because they make me look good. And I'm not worried about them taking over my spot, because in the long run, they can't do exactly what I do. So that's important, not to be threatened by people. Confidence, again, I said it earlier this morning, you got to hold yourself accountable. So important to hold yourself accountable to doing the right thing, because people notice that. It's very, very important. And another thing that I think is important is you got to show courage. People got to know that you're a courageous person, that you're ready to back them up, that one of the most important, one of the things that meant so much to me on the street, when I got made, the night I got made, I'll never forget, they said, Michael, wherever you go in the world, somebody will have your back. You got brothers all over the world. Don't ever worry about your mother, your daughter, your sister, your wife. Wherever you are, we have people that will support them. You'll never have to worry about them. We have your back. And I love that expression. That brotherhood in that life was what really meant something to me. Being part of something that my dad was part of, having this brotherhood. I think this, and ladies, not to be offensive, there's nothing more powerful. Of course, husband and wife, we separate that, but than guys in this brotherhood, this fellowship. I got your back, you got mine. It's so powerful. And I missed that when I left the life, because I had that relationship with guys. But God has been good to me. He's replaced that brotherhood with the fellowship that I have with many of my brothers now. And it's important to me. I don't think there's many things more powerful in life than that relationship that you have with people of similar background and similar interests as you. And obviously, you got to be honest. People, they can see through it. When you're a dishonest person, you lose anything that you had, and you lose the trust of people. You can't function. You can't operate. It's very important. Even if it means that you're going to lose something by being honest, you got to be honest. In the long run, it helps. It really does. So, I can go on and on. They wanted me to go 55 minutes, but I believe that people want to get into a Q&A. Am I right about that? Yes? Okay. So I don't know what time. It's 11:40. I think that lunch is at 12 o'clock. Do you mind if anybody asks a question now and then we can carry it in there also? Are we okay with that? Okay, let's do it. Yes, sir.
My first question is, will you go over for Christmas dinner with bread and brown steak and a moingu?
I'm sorry.
Come to my house for Christmas dinner, I'd love it.
Would I go to your house for a Christmas dinner? I'm Italian. We never pass up an opportunity to eat. You know that, of course.
My second question, you talked about it, I've talked to some people at the break. How did you manage to stay out of? How did you manage staying out of getting killed on your way out?
Yeah. Whenever I go and speak anywhere, the first three questions normally, okay? Number one, how are you still alive? Right. Number two, where's all your money buried? And number three, where's Jimmy Hoffa buried? Everybody asks that question about Jimmy Hoffa. It's unbelievable. Not too far from here either, but anyway. There's two reasons for that. And the overall reason for me is that God had a different plan and a purpose for my life. And there's no question about that. But there's also a practical reason for that. And I've said it earlier. I believe that you're never thrown into the fire without having some kind of preparation. So I spent 20 years in that life at a very high level. As a matter of fact, they were grooming me to be either the boss or the underboss. The boss had a son. He and I were very close. He baptized my older boy. And my father was promoting it. They wanted us to take over the family at some point in time, boss, underboss, whatever way it worked out. So I really knew the life well, obviously, because I was tutored by my dad. And then I was a pretty quick read myself. So I said earlier, one of the horrors of that life, you make a mistake, you get walked into a room, you don't walk out. So when I left the life, my plan was, okay, I'm going to move to California. I could never make it in New York. Too many guys would have never made it. There's no place to hide. I move out to California. It's one thing to, walk somebody into a room and then send somebody, a hit squad over to get you in California when you're prepared for it. So what do I mean prepared for it? Because you make a mistake, murder, you go away forever. So I knew certain things that I couldn't do. Number one, I didn't create patterns in my life, meaning I didn't walk my dog every morning at 7 a.m. Because if guys were watching me, they try to watch your pattern in life so they know when to reach you. I didn't go to the same restaurant every Tuesday night. I didn't make plans like that. I didn't announce my plans. I didn't go to any more clubs. Clubs are a bad place. I know who hangs out in there. I'm pretty well known. Somebody spots me. They have connections to New York. I walk in a parking lot. Boom, I'm gone. I haven't been in a club in 30 years. And I won't go. So, I was very disciplined in that because I knew I had to be. And over a period of time, I just outlasted everybody. I mean, everybody I know. I want to tell you how significant it is. You saw the Fortune magazine article. It was written in 1986, 50 biggest and wealthiest mob bosses in the country. It was half the magazine. It was a huge article. They actually featured 6 of us. I was one of the 6. And they had a chart with the 50 of us on there, according to rank and wealth and power. I was number 18. I was the youngest guy on the list, 5 behind Gotti at that point. He hadn't been made the boss. And people, don't ask me how they make a list like that. They didn't ask for our tax returns. It was a silly list. It sold a lot of magazines. It was nonsense. But what's not nonsense about that list, out of the list of 50, 48 of them are dead. The 49th is still doing time in prison. He's older than me, and I'm number 50. I'm the only one that survived. The night I got made, amen. The night I got made and went into that room, there was 6 of us. 5 of those guys were all dead. 5 of them were all murdered. We had a war in our family, and from 91 to 94, you want to hear some? Listen to this. 1991, my dad gets out on parole, and I'm on parole, and the family was going to war. And anytime there's a war, it's not a war between families. We had 5 families in New York. They don't go to war with each other. That stopped in the 40s. It's a civil war, and it's over power. Somebody wants to take over leadership. So the boss of our family, Carmine Persico, was in jail. His son was in jail, Mike Gumbata, but when he came out, he was supposed to take over, and they made an acting boss. This guy by the name of Little Vic was the acting boss. Well, when the son was coming out, the acting boss decided he's not giving it up. He's going to take over the family. So the families go to war. My father calls me. Now, this was after everything happened, and he says, Michael, never forget. He said, stop the nonsense. We need you back here now. The family's going to war. I said, man, I'm on parole. I'll be honest with you. I was so challenged. I said, how could I not go? I'm betraying my guys, my oath and everything. I couldn't sleep. I was so challenged, but I was on parole, and my wife, and I'm saying, what am I going to do? And my father still had such a pull on me. I had made a decision to go back. I was figuring out how I was going to break my parole and go back, and I told my dad, I said, okay, Dad, I'll be there. Just give me some time. I got to develop a strategy here. The feds were putting a lot of pressure on me. They knew that something was coming down. They wanted me to cooperate. I refused. They actually picked me up and took me into New York in New Jersey while I was on parole, and they wanted me to testify in a case against John Riggi, who was the boss in New Jersey. And they brought me in that night. I'm not going to tell you all the details, but bottom line is I refused. They brought me back to LA. They were very upset with me. And 3 days later, I'm walking out of a bank, and there's 15 agents, and they slapped the cuffs on me, threw me in a paddy wagon, and that's when they violated my parole. They were angry with me. and then the family goes to war. So I couldn't go back. They throw me in a hole for 3 years. The war lasted 3 years. So while poor Michael is in solitary, 13 guys got killed during that time. 18 guys became informants. 63 guys in the family went to prison. And I'm in the hole. Saved my life, quite possibly. I would have definitely been in trouble for violating my parole. It would have been a mess. But, you know, so when you say, I know there was a different plan and a purpose for me, it was very obvious. I didn't plan that. I didn't know how it was going to turn out. So circumstances sometimes along the way benefit you and aid you in things. And I look back, I look at that as divine intervention. Saved my life being in solitary. Sometimes when you're at your worst, you know, God's at his best. So anyway, anyone else?
So we'll go back and forth. We have a couple of online. There's about 50 of us on the Zoom call here.
Sure.
So Carmelin asked, did Michael feel that his change was gradual or that there was a light bulb moment that made you go through the change?
Well, the light bulb was my wife. You change or else, you know, that kind of a thing. But no, it was, look, you know, there's a saying, you can take the boy out of Brooklyn, but you can't take Brooklyn out of the boy. It was so much, you have to understand, you're so indoctrinated into that life. It was very hard to make the transition. It really was. It didn't happen overnight. You know, I mean, I was trying to be a person of faith, but then I had a strong pull on me in other ways. It took time. And even now, I mean, you know, I mean, I'll tell you this story. I pulled into a gas station, and I was driving, we have an SUV, my wife was with me, and I get out of the car, right? And I go to put gas in the car, and some guy pulls up in another SUV, and he gets out of his car, and he comes standing next to me, and he puts his arm on the pump, and he's about this big, right? And I said, could I help you? He said, yeah, your car is running. I said, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. You know, SUV, sometimes the engine's very quiet, you didn't hear it. I forgot to shut the car off. So I go back, I shut the car off, I come back, and here he's like this. I said, could I help you? Is there anything more you want to talk about? He said, why did you leave your car on? I said, I told you I forgot. What do you mean, why I left it on? I forgot. He said, my 5-year-old daughter would give me a dumb excuse like that. I said, oh, where's this guy going? All right, I said, look, did you come here to speak to me or did you came to put gas in your car? I said, put the gas in your car. He goes, you know, you're a real effing F. He starts cursing me out. Just like that, right? So at that moment, I wanted to pull the nozzle out and put the gas on him and light a match, right? That was my first reaction. I said, what is this guy doing, right? But I didn't, you know, I stood there. And I'm saying, look, put the gas in your car. I said it was an accident. I said, don't start something here. With that, I'm not kidding. His wife gets out of the car. She's standing on the running board, and she starts cursing me out. They must have had a discussion about this for 30 seconds and then come out, and they were going to harass me. So, you know, I'm just biting my tongue because he didn't stop. But I was very angry at that point, but I kept quiet, and my wife was in the car. Boom. So after I finished, I'd like walk by his car. I said, let me get the license plate number. Maybe I'll meet him at Starbucks one day or whatever, you know. But I don't do that either. I get in the car, and you would have thought I was starting a nuclear explosion, right? But as I get in the car, my daughter comes in. You know, these kids, they find you when you're putting gas in the car because now you gas them up too, right? I know their tricks. So my daughter comes in, and she's my real feisty one. I have 5 of them, right? My daughter, Amanda. And she sees that something was wrong. So she gets out of the car, and her chest is out. She says, Daddy, what's wrong? I said, Amanda, get back in the car. No, Daddy, what's wrong? I said, Mandy, get back in the car. He would have said something to her. He was getting gas. That was it, right? So, but you know, California people are crazy. I mean, all this green, it's like they were starting a nuclear explosion in the gas station. But, you know, I'm using that to illustrate there's a lot of challenging moments that I still have. I'm a lot better now. But it took a long time to make that transition. And if it wasn't for the people around me that kept me straight and kept me accountable, I'm telling you, it's all about accountability in life. I don't know if I would have made it, honestly. But it was so important to them, I didn't want to disappoint them. And then finally it sunk in. And you know, you have to continue to nourish yourself with good things. You know, it's like I tell our young people when I speak to these young gangbangers and everything, It's very difficult. They have more negative influences on their fingertips than we ever had as kids growing up. We're battling this little gadget right here all the time. Some of the stuff on here, I don't know if you ever saw TikTok and some of these things. It's horrible what these kids are learning. And, you know, we're in a battle constantly with them. And, but it takes constant nourishment, no doubt.
Well, thank you. Any other questions in the audience? All right, over here. Here, let me give you the mic here so we can all hear you. Oh.
I hate to ask this in a way, but I'll ask you, could you describe what happened when they did bring you down into that room and maybe relive it a moment? It's got to be a scary moment. But
it was very, you know, the two scariest moments in my life, that was number one. Or I would say this is neck and neck. The night they threw me in the hole, it was, the feds had told me, they said, Franzese, we don't want you to cooperate. I was playing a game with them. I was making them think I was going along, but in the end, I was trying to outsmart them, which I manipulated them for a while. As a matter of fact, John Gleason, who was the prosecutor that put Gotti away, was my prosecutor at one point in time. And he was trying to handle me to get me to cooperate. And he just wrote in his book, he said that Franzese manipulated us. We never got anything out of him. And that's what I was trying to do until it blew up and they put me they violated my parole, but turned out to be a good thing. But that night, when they put me in a hole, I said, they told my wife, they went to my house, and they confiscated everything from me because they said they were going to indict me on another racketeering case. They took my car away. They went into the bank. They leaned all my bank accounts. They went to my house. They took all the money out of my wife's purse and said, your husband, we're indicting him on another racketeering case. You don't work. This is his money. And they told her straight, your husband will never be a free man again. They were going to destroy me. And when they were driving me down to the lockup, they told me the same thing. We're done with you. We're indicting you. We violated your parole. You're done. I was 39 years old, 40 years old. So they locked me up. And for the first time in my life, I said, I'm done. It's over. I said, another racketeering case? They took all my money? I said, you don't beat these cases with a public defender. I spent millions defending myself on all of these trials. I said, they're tough to beat, a racketeering case. I said, they can't put me on a yard. I got everybody looking to hurt me. I said, my wife, she's 27 years old. She waited for me 5 years in prison, 13 months on parole. I said, I'm going to lose the girl I did all of this for. We had 2 little babies at that point. I said, I'm done. It's over. I'm finished. I'm going to spend the rest of my life in this 6x8 cell. You know, that was extremely frightening. And it was the only time in my life I ever experienced hopelessness. And I'm going to tell you this, people, it's the worst emotion you could ever feel. When you feel you're so hopeless and helpless and there's nothing you can do about it and everything that's dear to you is lost, it's scarier than walking in that room and getting a gun in your head. I mean that. If I had to compare the two, I think that was worse. Because I said, you know, I'm going to spend the rest of my life, I'm a young guy in this hole, 30, 40, 50 years. I laid my head down on that cot and I said, God, if you're up there, put me to sleep, take me. I don't want to live. I didn't want to live. And honestly, I'll admit, I used to demean people that were suicidal. I said, they're weak. They don't face up to their troubles. I don't do that anymore. I wasn't suicidal that night. I wasn't that brave. But honestly, I wanted to close my eyes and it was too painful to think of what I had to face. Couldn't deal with it. And when you compare it to that night walking in the room, you know, what happened is the guy, the boss was on parole, Persico was on parole, so we had to be covert in going to the meeting. So I drive my car into Brooklyn, and I meet with another captain in the family, Jimmy Angelina, and he was a good friend of mine. I knew him all my whole life. So he's in the driving, I park my car, I get in the passenger side, and there's a guy sitting behind me. I met him maybe once. I didn't really recognize him. I said, well, who is this guy, and why is he here? And Jimmy doesn't really introduce me to him. Now, this is a bad setup. And as we're driving, I'm waiting for Jimmy to tell me what's going on this night. Well, he don't say anything. He starts talking to me about the Yankees. I'm a diehard Yankee fan. I don't want to hear about the Yankees that night. And I'm waiting. Now, when I get out of the car, It was a basement apartment, and we had to walk down a path, go down into the basement, right? And I get out, I start to walk down the path. Jimmy, I assume, gets behind me, and the other guy behind him. Now, this is a very bad setup. I said, I'm in trouble here. I said, I'm going to get killed. This is bad. And I knew there was some rumbling on the street. They had written an article about me in Newsday, and they said that I was becoming powerful enough to break away from the Colombo family and start my own family. It may have well been written by a fictional, it was nonsense, total nonsense. But you know, it gets into guys' heads in that life. And my father was home on parole. Maybe this guy is thinking that me and my dad are planning something. I don't know. You know, so all these things are starting to run into my head. So it was about a 30-yard walk, I'll never forget, from the car down to the basement. And I'm telling you, my heart's beating out of my chest. My knees are getting weak. I mean, I was scared. I'm telling you, I was scared. And when that door opened up, man, because I knew the setup, you know, a guy'd be standing there, boom, that would be it. They don't draw it out. I don't know how I didn't faint, quite honestly. It was scary. But obviously I'm here, right? So we sit down and they start grilling me about money and the gas business and, you know, and I started getting angry with the boss. I said, listen, I'm bringing you guys $2 million a week. This is my deal. I set it up. I'm taking all the risk and you're questioning me now? And then I started to get angry, and then I said, wait a second, I'm here with the boss. You don't get angry with the boss, because that would have turned a good thing bad, right? You don't ever do that no matter what. So I caught myself and got through it. And then when it's over, hey, come on, let's have a glass of wine, and isn't everybody's hugging and this and that. I just wanted to get out of there. I was like so mad. I'll tell you what happened. I said, Jimmy, drive me home. I got to go out to Long Island. I got a long way home. I get in the car with Jimmy. Now, this guy knew him my whole life. Right? And I turned to him, and I was really angry with him because he didn't prepare me. And I turned to him, he goes, wait, Mike, before you say anything. I said, what? He said, I got to be honest with you, Mike. He said, you held yourself pretty good in there tonight. This was serious. So now I'm even more mad. I said, you know that? You're my best, one of my good friends. You know that? You don't prepare me? And he looked at me, man, and I'll never forget. And he said, well, if it was the other way around, would you have told me? I thought about it for a minute. He was smart. I said, no. He said, Michael, this is the life we lead. He said, you know it as well as anybody. You grew up in it. And I'm sitting there, and I didn't tell you this part. I don't like to always say it, but before this whole thing came up, I had met my father. He was the one that got the message. We were in the driveway, and he was the one that got the message that we had to go in that night, me and him. So my dad was on parole. He never went anywhere. I always drove him. So I said, all right, what time you want to go? And he said, no, they want you to come in, me to come in first, you to come in second. And I said, well, why are they going to do that? I said, you know, there's talk on the street. No, we're going to go together. And we argued about it. And my dad, no, we got an order from the boss. We got to do it that way. And we were both captains at that point. He was captain, I was a captain. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. You know the talk. Why are we going to let them separate us? Let's go together. No. Argued back and forth. Finally, I threw my hands up. I said, all right, Dad, I've been listening to you all my life. I don't like this, but if this is what you want, we'll do it. So we're driving back, right? Jimmy says that to me. I don't say a word. I'm thinking about this. I go to get out of the car, and he grabs my arm, and he says, I want to tell you something, Michael. I said, what? He said, you're not going to want to hear this. He said, but you can believe this. I'm telling you the truth. I said, what? He said, your father was in there before you tonight. He didn't help you one bit. He threw you under the bus. And brother, I was stunned. I didn't even know what to say. I said, what? And as I'm walking back to my car, I'm thinking about this. I said, what could my father have done? And then I realized it. Knowing my father so well, he didn't stand up for me. He said, hey, and I found this out later on, because, you know, word always leaks out when people. If my son is stealing money, I don't know anything about it. I'm on parole. He handles everything. I don't do anything. Instead of standing up for me and saying he would never do that, he just threw me under the bus. And I was stunned. And, you know, it put it in my head. I said, man, if this life can separate father and son, what do we really have here? Now, honestly, I didn't say anything to him for 2 years. I didn't meet my wife until 2 years later. But I can honestly say if this incident didn't happen, I don't think I would have ever walked away from the life. I think that was a defining moment that gave me the, okay, this life is really a treacherous life, and I can't even trust my own father. I said, now I meet my wife, and she gave me the motivation to make the move. So I know this is not about leadership, but it was just about life. But I don't know if we're going to lunch now? Oh, we still got time. My time is yours.
All right, go ahead.
It's a very quick question.
Sure.
Did your wife know who you were and what you were into, and she told you to leave the family or else, or did you hide it from her and fix your life before she found out?
Well, here's the deal. On that movie I told you about, I was the producer, right? My wife was from Anaheim, California. She used to dance in Disneyland, Knott's Berry Farm. She didn't know anything about the mob. She saw The Godfather once. That was it. She didn't know anything. It was very foreign to her. And I never came to her and said, oh, by the way, I'm a capo regime in the Colombo crime family. You just didn't do that, But after we got to know each other and she fell in love with me and I met her family and the whole thing, then I started getting arrested again and all this stuff. So it was like put upon her. But I always tell her, fortunately, that you fell in love with me first, because I don't know if this would have lasted. But, the main thing, until this very moment, right now, I have never sat down and had discussion with my wife about my former life. She doesn't watch any of the documentaries on me. She said, listen, I've lived through enough. I don't need to know any of that. It's okay. That's how she deals with it. Now she gets a little bit more bombarded because whatever, people contact her, good things, not bad things, but she dealt with it. Look, my wife will be the first one to tell you, I love my husband, but if God wasn't in the foundation of our marriage, she wouldn't have made it. It was just too hard. And I always tell people, that really I'm not the story here. My wife's the story. What that girl went through, having very little knowledge of what was going on, and then finding out and sticking with it and raising our little kids for 8 years without me and chasing me around to prisons, to try to visit me. She had it rough. She's very special. She really is.
We just have one more, online question from Ernie Hollow. Can we ask Michael if his dad ever became a Christian before passing?
Did my dad become a Christian? One of the guilty things I carry with me is I don't think I ministered enough to my dad throughout his lifetime when I became a Christian. It was very hard. I can't explain it. But until he passed away, over the past 20 years, every time I went into a church I've had people praying for him, thousands and thousands of people all over the world praying for my dad. About 6 years ago, no, maybe longer than that, I'm sorry, I'm screwed up with the time. I went and did a big conference. It was here in Michigan area. I don't remember exactly where. And we did a church, and then we did a company that had 5,000 employees. And I met the chaplain of that company. She was very moved by the relationship with me and my dad. She asked me if she can go visit my father. I said, absolutely. So somehow she got in. She was very, motivated to get in because they don't just let you in. And she spent 3 hours with my father, and she called me afterwards very excited, said she read the Bible to my dad, and my dad accepted Christ. Wow, right? I didn't see evidence of that afterwards, but I believe it. He knew who Jesus was. And then another thing happened. Another pastor went in to see him at my behalf. I asked the pastor to go, and my father didn't know he was coming, and pastor got in, and he announced to my father, I'm a pastor, and my father looked up and said, oh, my son is a priest. I'm not a priest, but that's how he viewed it, and he was like proud of it. The pastor said, your father was really proud of that. So I think inwardly, maybe he didn't want it to come out, but I think, it made me feel good that I think that he did accept Christ. I still feel I didn't do enough. I really didn't. I should have just been more forceful with him. I can do it with anybody but him for some reason. And but I believe God is faithful, and I think that I always think of the thief on the cross. last few seconds of your life. That's the kind of God we serve. So hopefully, yes.
Chris, how much longer do we have? 5 minutes. We have one more question. And
Sure.
All right, Ricky. Thanks.
I had a one. How long did you wait to go back to New York after you left?
Well, after all this happened, I didn't see my dad for 10 years because it was during that time that, again, I don't mean to cast any aspersions on people, but the feds were really doing me dirty in that they were putting my name on the witness list of trials that were coming up in New York. And I was sending messages back. I said, I'm not going to hurt anybody. Don't believe it. But then my name comes up in the discovery and the witness list, and people don't believe it because everybody says they're not going to do it, and then they end up on the witness stand. So they just thought that was the pattern I was following. But then these trials start coming up. I don't appear. 1, 2, 3. Then they violate my parole. Now people are saying, hey, this guy walked away, but he's not hurting anybody. So the pressure came off a bit, right? But I didn't see my dad, and then my dad gets out on parole. I get home. He says, he sends for me. He says, I want to see you. I said, okay. He says, meet me in such and such a place because we were both on parole. But after that incident, that walking in the room, I said, nope. I said, I'll meet you at the house, your house. Well, we're on parole. I said, Dad, I know how to get rid of the cops. Don't worry about it. I still remember that, nobody's going to find me coming to the house. So I get there. I'll never forget. He lived in Long Island. I open the door, and he's standing there just like this. And he looks at me, and the first things he said, if you would have listened to me, you'd have been the boss of the Colombo family. I looked at him, I said, Dad, are you in like a time warp, Twilight Zone? I said, you don't know what's going on in the past 10 years? I said, I serve a different master now. Those are my words. He said, you're really serious about all this Bible stuff? I said, yeah, I am. He said, all right, let's talk. And that's how the ice got broken with him, right? So it was 10 years before I went back to New York. And I kept getting requests to come and speak in churches and all of that. And I told my agent at the time, I said, look, always inform me. I'm probably not going to go because I don't want to get my wife nervous and all of that. I said, I probably won't go, but I want to know about it anyway. Time passes. I get a request to go to a church in Queens, kind of my territory too. And I said, okay. I wake up the next morning and I call my agent. I said, I'm going to do that church. He said, oh, Michael, it's in. I said, I just feel like I want to do it. So my wife didn't talk to me. She said, you're very selfish. How could you do that? I said, I got to break the ice here. I feel like something's telling me to do it. It's been long enough. So she was mad at me. She wouldn't even talk to me. She called me selfish. She says, how could you do that? How could you jeopardize the family and all of that? I understood. But I felt a strong pull on me to go. I said, just relax. It's going to be okay. I get to the church. This is the truth. There's a moat around the church. It was like nothing I ever saw before because they were doing construction around it, right? Now, I'm going to be honest with you. If somebody was going to go and try to kill me, they want to make sure they can get out of there quick. That was not a good setup, right? Second to that, the church was right next door to the police station, right next door. And it gets even better. I go into the church. It's a Korean church. Everybody was Korean except for two guys in the audience that looked like Italian guys, right? The band that was playing before I went on, they all became my protectors now, right? They said, Michael, there's two guys that are standing out like a sore thumb. So security goes and gets the guys and brings them to me. And they said, Michael, we came to hear you. They were singers in the band. And they just wanted to hear me. They lived in the neighborhood. So I called my wife. I said, honey, there's a police station right next door. There's a moat around there, and it's a Korean church. She hung up on me anyway, but... But anyway, that's the first time that I went back. And then after that, I kept going back. Now, look, I'm not stupid. When I go back there, I make sure, I have security. Because like I said, I don't sell them short. But they're not interested in me at the moment. Now, again, I can't go back to Brooklyn and say, hey, guys, I'm moving back into the neighborhood. It's okay. I wouldn't last 48 hours. But, I believe in God. But God doesn't tell you to be stupid. You got to use your head. You can't do dumb things. So anyway. But that's a long answer to a short question. Thank you.
Hey, real quick, a couple quick things. Stay up here just for a minute. I want you to explain what you have. You got some books, and you got a couple old ones. You got a brand new book that just came out this year. Why don't you talk about what you got here?
Okay.
And maybe you guys can check it out.
Yeah, this is my life story. This is the book that they're basing the television series on. It's called Blood Covenant. That's been out quite a while, but you know, it's been doing well for a long time. This book, this is probably my favorite book. It's a ministry tool. I have about 10,000 of these in prisons throughout the country, in juvenile halls. It's very concise about my faith, what led me here, experiences in my life. And when people ask me, and the reason I got it, people always ask me, Michael, how did you do this? How did you transform? How did you forgive yourself? And it's all in here. And I believe a lot of people have been helped by reading this book. And it's a quick read, and I do that because I know attention span sometimes. But it's kind of a really condensed version of this book. This book, A Mafia Democracy, just was released in May. It's my latest book. It's been on a bestseller list for Barnes & Noble and Amazon for quite a while. And quite honestly, I felt an obligation to write this book because people, our government right now is operating like the mafia. There's no question. Their ideology is very Machiavellian. It's all about power and control. This is a bipartisan book. I don't pick on anybody on either side. It's our government system. And I did a lot of research on this. I can see it. It's just so obvious to me what's happening. Because remember, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Those are true words, and that's what happens in our government today. You know, I will say this. I wrote this book because I have children and grandchildren. They can't do anything. I'm 71 years old. I'm not worried about my life. But my kids and grandchildren are growing up in a different country than I grew up in. There's no question about it. And we have to hold our public officials accountable. And the way we do that is we recognize what's going on. So I did this to alert people. What do I want to happen? I want them to hold people accountable. You know, I'll say this very briefly. You got a best friend, you got a wife, you got a husband, whatever. They lie to you once, okay. They lie to you a second time, not cool anymore. They lie to you a third, fourth, fifth time. Hey, what's going on? You know, you break relationships, you split marriages, your business partners go. Our public officials lie to us every single day. They make promises that affect our lives and our livelihood and the safety of our country and our lives. And what do we say? Oh, it's politics. It's not politics, it's lying. And they're doing it to the detriment of the people, and it's so obvious. And listen, people have knocked me because I'm a Trump supporter. I'm not a Trump supporter. I liked his policies. He's not coming to my house for dinner. I'm not going to let him date my daughter. We're not best friends, and I'm not in his company. I don't go to Mar-a-Lago. But I thought his policies were good for America. That's all I care about. If it was Biden, if it was Trump, it was the guy next door. If they're doing the right thing for the country and my family and the people I care for, that's all I care about. It's not about political parties for me. And that's what I'm trying to make people understand in this thing. And like I say, some of the things that I'm seeing today, I don't understand it. You know, in California, they raised the felony level to $1,000. Do you know that, I promise you this, people are going into the store with a calculator and they're stealing $950 and they're walking out of the store and security won't stop them. And they don't get prosecuted, they get no bail. They have 17 there were 17 gangs that were stalking people in restaurants, following them to their house and stealing before they got into their driveway. And these people go out with no bail. It's crazy what's going on. It's not a safe place. I have 2 daughters in New York. I told them, get out of the city, because some of the things that I'm hearing there, that what's going on, it's crazy stuff. And it's all politically motivated, people. You gotta, you know, when you're defunding the police and how can you have no, let me tell you something. If I don't pay my taxes, I'm going away for 20 years. But I can go into a subway and slash somebody and get out on bail the next day. It's insanity. And people got to recognize this, and what do we have to do? This isn't about politics, it's about our lives. It's about our country. It's about what we hold dear to us. So I'm sorry, I am passionate about this because that's the only reason I wrote the book. And believe me, I'll tell you this story. I started writing this book 7 years ago. Publisher gave me, I'm going to be honest with you, $125,000 advance. I started writing the book. I get into the book, and I'm talking to my wife, and I'm saying, why am I doing this? I have no problem with the government now. They leave me alone. I said, people are going to get upset with me. I said, I'm not writing a book. I went to the publisher. I gave him back my advance. I said, I'm not writing the book. Cut to 7 years later, I felt an obligation to write the book. And what did I do? I self-published it. So it wasn't even about me getting an advance or anything. I said, I'm going to do this on my own because people need to understand I'm doing this because I'm trying to make people aware. And that's it. Anyway, is that a good sales pitch? It wasn't. It was my heart. Trust me.
And then there.
Yeah, well, this is the course. If you go on, look, if this interests you and you think, it's something you can benefit by, whatever you heard here, you're going to hear it in so much more detail because I really put everything into this. But you can go to michaelfranciscourse.com and see if it's something worth it. This is the workbook because you can't teach somebody something without giving them an exercise afterwards to see what they absorbed. So, and I think we might have some here. If we have some extra workbooks, you can take it, look at it, and see if it's something for you.
Awesome. Well, hey, real quick, and then a couple quick housekeeping. We've got lunch here in just a minute, and he's going to be with us tomorrow night at 5 o'clock here. A lot more people. It'll be full house, and it'll be similar to what you've already heard, but also be here Sunday morning at 9 o'clock and 10:30. So 3 opportunities. Invite you to come back and check that out. And so if you're online, hey, thanks for hanging out with us. And I'm gonna do a quick word of prayer for the food, and then we'll dismiss. God, we ask you to bless our time together. We thank you for the time that we had. Hope that we learned some things. We thank you for Michael and for giving us his time this morning. We ask you to bless the food. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for coming.